January 1980, Lusaka, Zambia, a city alive with hope, dreams, and the hum of daily life. But in the shadows of bus stations and lonely fields, a nightmare was brewing. In just 9 months, 29 women and girls would be found raided and strangled, their bodies left in haunting displays, and one name would terrorize a nation: the Lusaka Strangler. Welcome to African True Crime Podcast, where we delve into the secrets, crimes, and mysteries lurking in Africa. I'm your host, Milton, and today we tell the story of Zambia's most infamous serial killer, Milton Sipalo, aka the Lusaka Strangler. Milton Sipalo, infamously known as the Lusaka Strangler, during a horrifying spree between January and September 1980, terrorized the city, preying on vulnerable women and girls. His heinous acts, which included murder and raid, claimed the lives of 29 innocent victims. Sipalo was a 23-year-old soldier in the Zambian army who was assigned to the Kabwe military camp. He came across as a reserved and quiet person who did not attract much notice. He had a normal height of 6 feet and a weight of only 140 pounds, making him visually unimpressive. He also found it simple to stay unnoticed because of his pale complexion and slim build, which allowed him to fit in with the crowd. Lusaka turned into a hunting ground for Sipalo's perverse impulses throughout that tragic year. Without realizing the danger that lurked in the shadows, his victims, young women and girls between the ages of 10 and 32, innocently went about their lives. The atrocities that transpired were witnessed by the city's parks, bus stops, and sidewalks. He was able to claim his victims' lives at a startling rate, on average, one life every week. The Lusaka Strangler approached his attacks methodically, picking his victims meticulously from public places like train stations and bus terminals. He used craft manipulation to draw these unsuspecting individuals into the grip of darkness and take them to remote and desolate places. It was there that the most terrible aspect of his true personality became apparent. Sipalo would brutally strangle his victims after subjecting them to horrible acts of sexual assault, ending their hopes and dreams in the most heinous manner possible. Investigators and the public were deeply affected by the fallout from his atrocities. Sipalo left the dead remains of his victims in public places in a cruel act of taunting, making sure they would be found. He didn't stop there though. Unsettling reminders of his evil were left by the uncanny signatures found at the places of his atrocities. It appears that he used chemicals during his attacks, since strange forms of mucus were found leaking from his victims' noses. He also frequently surrounded the bodies with coins or bottles, as if to make fun of those who followed him, leaving behind twisted puzzles that the authorities had to solve. A terrible tapestry of broken lives was created by the victims themselves. All of them were women and girls. A startling similarity among his victims was that the majority were either Lozi speakers or members of the Lozi ethnic community. Many of them were travelers from other cities and villages whose paths were cut short by a terrifying run-in with a creature disguised as a person. Nation identification cards, which served as a silent, unsettling reminders of their identities, were frequently left behind. The Lusaka Strangler's reign of terror had a depressing effect on the city as a whole, leaving its residents feeling helpless and terrified. The city's peace was shattered one morning when a call came in. No voice on the other end, just directions to a barren field near Lusaka Boys Primary School. When officers arrived, a strong sickening smell lingered in the air. They found Grace Shambilu, just 22. Her body lay abandoned with only a few personal items to tell them who she was. Grace's death would be the first of many, but at the time, police had no idea they were chasing a predator. The killings escalated quickly. Each new victim, each scene sent shockwaves through the city. A 10-year-old girl, Priscilla Njovu, was next. Her parents sent her to buy groceries, but she never came back home. Sipalo's methods were chilling. He preyed on women at bus stations and footpaths. He lured them with false promises, sometimes in his military uniform, before leading them to isolated places. By the end of January, the bodies kept appearing. Florence Mulima was found behind the NEPA building. Her life ended violently. Days later, Regina Munanga, an off-duty police officer, was also found dead between the showgrounds and the University of Zambia. Her own identification was left on her body, an act of taunting that sent shock waves through Lusaka. Witnesses began reporting strange sightings. One account described a man in a military uniform seen walking with Claudia Maimbolwa near Nassau Road. Hours later, she too was gone, leaving behind yet another shattered family. The patterns were clear. Sipalo struck women of all ages, from young schoolgirls like Foster Kaela to mothers and travelers. Cornfields, schools, footpaths, these once safe places were now feared. By February, police uncovered a critical clue. Boot prints were found at the scene of Foster Kaela's murder in a cornfield between Kalingalinga and Lusaka City Airport. This signaled that Sipalo might be operating in areas where anonymity was easy, such as isolated fields and quiet roadsides. But despite the clues, Sipalo moved quickly and quietly. Names like Milian Chipeta, Grace Mutondo, and Frida Nchuve were added to the growing list of victims. Each story painted a grim picture: women lured, violated, and strangled with whatever Sipalo had on hand. It could be a scarf, a belt, even his bare hands. The investigation grew more intense as the number of fatalities increased. By the end of January 1980, investigators had already concluded that the killings were related, but they were still questioning whether a gang or a single person was to blame. Rapid interrogations of local murderers and non-sex offenders were undertaken, but regrettably, no significant leads were found. The public outrage and growing terror forced politicians and the media to put more pressure on the police, calling for prompt action to apprehend the elusive murderer. As the situation worsened, the government began what was called Operation Rosemary, a comprehensive plan to end the Lusaka Strangler's reign of terror. The government also implemented a dusk to dawn cafe to reinforce these preventive measures, which limited people's ability to travel throughout Lusaka at night. A sizable reward of 10,000 kwacha was also provided to encourage anyone with information that would result in a suspect's arrest. Police systematically set up patrols around the city in pursuit of the Lusaka Strangler, concentrating on locations where the criminal was known to have picked up his victims. Understanding that a more secretive strategy was required, undercover female cops who spoke Lozi were positioned at bus terminals. These specific undercover cops were not approached by the Lusaka Strangler, but their presence was intended to obtain intelligence and possibly serve as a deterrent. On a tragic evening of July 16th, a young woman set out to meet her parents in Makeni, a town close to Lusaka. On her way to the Kamwala bus stop, she came across two soldiers who could be identified by their different uniforms. One was wearing a combat outfit and the other was wearing a green one. Eventually, as the events progressed, the second soldier left the scene, leaving only the combat uniformed soldier. He offered to take her to Makeni, but the woman refused. Regardless, the soldier took her possessions, which were in a basket, forcing her to follow him against her will. When they reached a remote trail, and under the disguise of creating a feeling of familiarity, the soldier disclosed his identity as Lieutenant Nyambe. He then asked the woman if she could identify him in civilian clothes, to which she responded that she could. This naive statement aggravated Sipalo, who quickly shoved the woman to the ground and put his hands around her throat and began choking her. In an attempt to save her life, she mustered all of her strength and kicked so hard that her assailant briefly relaxed his hold. But the relief didn't last long. In a tragic turn of events, Lieutenant Nyambe slashed her with a wrench. But in the midst of the violence, he made eerie statements, accusing her of being the one who might lead to his imprisonment and taking blame for the deaths of other females. At the same time, three alert security officers in the vicinity, attracted by the woman's wailing cries, acted quickly. As they hurried toward the distraught screams, they blew their whistles to warn others of the catastrophe that was taking place. When they arrived on the scene, they found the woman still shaking in terror and in pain, but Sipalo was nowhere to be found. The woman was then taken to a police station and interviewed. An experienced detective who had previously seen an encounter with a criminal was able to offer a useful description. The assailant was described as a short, brown-skinned man wearing a uniform from the military. His ability to speak Nyanja and English proficiently with the characteristics of a Lozi accent was included in the description. Based on the information obtained, police concluded that the offender was either a real soldier or someone posing as one. There was also another second survivor. On what appeared to be a typical day, a mother was traveling from Chingola to Lusaka with her baby. Along the way, they joined other passengers on a bus, and by chance, she met another woman who was traveling to Petauke. They developed a brief friendship during their shared journey, but the two women encountered an unforeseen challenge when their bus pulled into Lusaka. They learned that no buses were leaving for their destinations until the next morning. Since they had no other options, they decided to stay the night at the bus terminal. However, their peace was abruptly broken when two soldiers wearing military uniform came toward them. The women consented with a request to view their national identification cards, possibly anticipating a standard examination. They had no idea that this encounter would be the start of a terrifying ordeal. Encouraged by their position of authority, the soldiers tried to convince the woman to spend the night with them in a guest house, but the woman bravely refused. However, the Petauke woman was forced to accompany one of the soldiers after he grabbed her things. Unfortunately, there is still mystery surrounding the fate of this unnamed woman. There is an eerie gap in the story since it is unclear where she is now and how she's doing, or if she's even alive, which just further heightens the tension of the already terrifying occurrences. Realizing that his friend had been successful in luring the Petauke woman away, the other soldier attempted to take advantage of the situation. He went up to the other woman and told her that her friend had gone to the guest house to spend the night. Overwhelmed by mixed feelings, the woman reluctantly consented to join him. The woman and the soldier walked for about 30 minutes till they reached a barren, narrow road. The soldier's aims abruptly changed from coercion to violence. As she fought to keep a beautiful infant safe in her arms, he closed his hands around her throat and started strangling her. She passed out and woke up hours later to the cries of her baby. She found her national identification card placed awkwardly on top of her head. Her wedding band and wristwatch were stolen. She quickly got up and ran to a nearby house to ask for help. Following the vicious assault on the second survivor, law enforcement agencies acted more quickly to apprehend the strangler. Their efforts eventually paid off and Sipalo was captured. The community felt relieved that the person who had committed the heinous acts was no longer a threat. The second survivor, in the company of an undercover detective, was taken back to the bus terminal where she had been lured by the attacker in the hopes that she might see and recognize the attacker. She subsequently was able to recognize him, and funny enough, he was actually wearing the wristwatch that he had stolen from her. Quick action followed, and the law enforcement officers were able to capture Sipalo and place him under custody. During the search of his house a day later, items belonging to numerous of his victims were discovered, providing horrifying proof of his horrible deeds. Sipalo fabricated a story to avoid taking blame after learning of the incriminating discovery, saying the objects belonged to a woman he had an affair with. 3 witnesses, including the 2 survivors, courageously identified Sipalo as the elusive strangler. He grudgingly admitted, saying, quote, "If they can pick me from the line of others, then I'm the one who tried to kill them." End quote. Sipalo disclosed the presence of a suspected collaborator, a Lance Corporal, during the ensuing investigations, implying a sinister collaboration in his reign of terror. The accused corporal, however, strongly denied any involvement, and after a careful review of the material, law enforcement was unable to find any supporting connections. Therefore, he was released from custody. On September 18, 1980, justice took a surprising turn. Sipalo escaped the cops who were escorting him while he was being taken to the Lusaka Central Police Station for more questioning. In an act of defiance and despair, he climbed the building's roof while still handcuffed and jumped to his death in front of a surprised audience. Sipalo's death may have stopped the killings, but for the families of his 29 victims, closure was elusive. The victims. The first victim was Grace Shambilo. She was only 21 years old at the time of her death. She was killed on the 5th of January. Police received an anonymous call alerting them that the body of a dead woman was lying in a field behind the Lusaka Boys Primary School. When they arrived at the field, they found the decomposing body of Grace, quickly identifying her from her belongings. Although they could not determine a cause of death, the police suspected Shambilo had been killed in another area before her corpse was dumped in the field. The second victim is an unidentified woman believed to be 21 years old. She was found on the 16th of January. Her body was found lying along a footpath. She had been arrow-weighted and then strangled to death. Investigators concluded she had been murdered in the same place her body was found, as the woman's belongings were strewn around the area. The third victim was Florence Mwangelwa Mulima, also 21 years old. She was found on the 12th of January. Sipalo had arrow-weighted and murdered Mulima and left her corpse behind a NIPA office. The fourth victim was Priscilla Njovu. She was only 10 years old at the time of her death. She was killed on the 14th of January. Njovu's parents had sent her to buy groceries, but Sipalo strangled her to death and left her body in a maize field between Olympic Path and North Mead. Regina Munanga was the fifth victim. She was 25 years old. She was killed on the 28th of January. She was an off-duty police officer. Sipalo arrow-weighted and fatally strangled her between the University of Zambia and showgrounds. He left her ID lying on her body. Claudia Mayimbolwa was the sixth victim. She was also 21 years old. She was killed on the 30th of January. Sipalo strangled Mayimbolwa to death near Nassau Road. Witnesses last saw her alive with a man dressed in a soldier's uniform. The seventh victim was Millian Chipeta. She was 20 years old. Her body was found on the 7th of February. Chipeta was strangled to death with a scarf in a cornfield between Lusaka City Airport and Long Acres. The eighth victim is unidentified. She is believed to have been between the ages of 18 and 21 years old. Her body was found on the 10th of February. Sipalo had arrow-weighted and strangled her to death at an unknown location before dumping her body along Washama Road in Namununga. Forster Kaila was the ninth victim. She was also only 10 years old. Her body was found on the 11th of February. Sipalo strangled Kaila to death while she was walking home from school. Her body was found in a cornfield between the city airport and Kalingalinga. Investigators also found boot prints at the crime scene. The 10th victim was Grace Mutondo, at only 26 years old. She was killed on the 17th of February. Mutondo was arrow-weighted and fatally strangled in a football pitch behind the hotel she had been staying at. Frida Nchube was the 11th victim. She was 32 years old. She was killed on the 25th of February. Nchube's corpse was found near a hostel next to a primary school. Footprints indicated that Sipalo picked her up from a hotel before strangling her to death. The 12th victim was Jane Malako. She was only 18 years old. She was murdered on the 13th of March. Sipalo strangled her to death on a footpath after he picked her up from a bus station. Hilda Banda was the 13th victim. She was also only 18 years old. She was as well killed on the 13th of March. She was strangled to death with her own belt. Her corpse was found in the playfield of Kamwala Secondary School. She was last seen alive at a hotel. Agatha Musa Nasilele was the 14th victim. She is also believed to be 18 years old. She was murdered on the 15th of March. Nasilele was arrow-weighted and fatally strangled along a footpath. The 15th victim is Imelda Monde Chavazwa. She was 26 years old. She was killed on the 23rd of March. Sipalo had also arrow-weighted and murdered Chavazwa and draped her body over a bush. Miriam Chawala was the 16th victim. She was only 15 years old at the time of her death. Her body was discovered on the 25th of March. The body of Miriam Chavazwa, arrow-weighted and strangled to death, was found between Duli Motors and Chivolia compound. A message found near her body written on a cardboard stated, quote, "Nothing to say to you guys, and don't mind at all what I told you when you were going for elections. Comrades, no woman now. Please, my friend, be careful how you walk. Yours, no woman now." End quote. Maggie Mwanza was the 17th victim. She was 21 years old. She was killed on the 4th of April. Sipalo arrow-weighted and strangled Mwanza to death before dumping her body along a footpath. Regina Mumba was the 18th victim. She was 25 years old. She was killed on the 7th of April. Sipalo had fatally strangled Mumba and left her body behind a house near the city airport. Details surrounding the 19th victim are unknown. The 20th victim is also unidentified, but she was killed on the 4th of May. The city awoke on May 4th to the heartbreaking scene of an unnamed young woman lying at Woodland Stadium's gate. The 21st victim was Kwaleyela Situmbeko. She was 24 years old. She was killed on the 14th of May. Her body was found along a footpath. She was arrow-weighted and strangled. Rosemary Mufula Choma was the 22nd victim. She was 24 years old. She was killed on the 10th of June. Sipalo picked up Choma from a roadside where she sold milk. He then arrow-weighted and murdered her before dumping her body in the bushes. When she was found, her forehead had an open wound on it. The 23rd victim was Lita Mawango. She was only 18 years old. She was discovered on the 16th of June. She was pregnant at the time of her death. Sipalo stabbed Lita 4 times in the chest, fatally strangled her before proceeding to hang her by the neck against a nipa fence. Agnes Mwelo was the 24th victim. She is believed to have been 22 years old at the time of her death. She was killed on the 21st of June. Sipalo strangled Mwelo with a piece of cloth and left her body lying in a bush near a secondary school. Jenny Mwitila Pumulo was the 25th victim. She was only 20 years old. She was killed on the 30th of June. Pumulo's corpse was found near a primary school. She had been arrow-weighted and strangled. Details surrounding the 26th, 27th, and 28th victims are unclear, but 2 of them were killed in July and another one in September. The 29th victim was Mary Chisanga. She was killed on the 12th of September. After escorting her boyfriend to a railroad station, Chisanga was picked up by Sipalo, who murdered her, mutilated her umbilical, and nearly disemboweled her. Her remains were found off a road between 2 fitness centers. The crimes left scars on Lusaka that would never heal. A city once brimming with life learned to look over its shoulders, and families grieved lives that should never have been stolen. The Lusaka Strangler story is a stark reminder of the darkness that can exist within one person and the toll it takes on a community. How did someone so quiet, so unassuming, evade suspicion for so long? Did he suffer from a mental illness? If so, could his struggles with mental illness have been addressed earlier? These questions linger even decades later. But today, we remember the names of the women and girls Milton Sipalo silenced: Grace, Priscilla, Florence, Regina, Hilda, and so many more. Their lives mattered, their stories matter. In sharing them, we honor their memories and remind ourselves of the resilience of the families, investigators, and communities who carried on. Thank you for joining us on the African True Crime Podcast. If this story resonated with you, share it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment down below. Let these voices echo so their memories are never forgotten. Until next time, I'm your host, Mulilo Fasani. Stay awake, stay vigilant, and stay safe.